Hello, everyone. Welcome to this special session of the FCAS webinar seminaries, co-organized with the Atlantic Salmon Research Joint Venture. I just want to let you know, before anything else, if you wish to use the translation, we will have simultaneous translation. Just please navigate to the chat and you will see all the instructions. And if you have any questions, just please write them on the chat and then we will be able to help you. My name is Renata. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the INRS. I'm working on Atlantic salmon historical data, and I'm also the data mobilization leader at the Atlantic Salmon Research Joint Venture. I will be your moderator today in this special session, and this will be a bit different from the previous FCAS webinar series because we're going to have a panel format with 4 panelists. And they will give short presentations and it will be followed by a question and answer session. Our panel topic today is strengthening data management for Atlantic salmon conservation. And I will give just a very short introduction of what was the motivation for creating this web panel. And it was mostly from several key challenges that facing Atlantic salmon research and conservation. We all know that there is enormous amounts of information that are being generated for Atlantic salmon, but the data still remains fragmented and very inconsistent, which makes it very difficult to combine information across regions and institutions. We also have limited coordination and shared standards, which reduce the ability to use these existing data sets for broader conservation questions. And we also face social and institutional barriers, which makes an effective data mobilization a little bit harder because it requires trust, collaboration, respect for sensitive and culturally held knowledge. But however, we have some promising tools, emerging policies, and some community-led projects that show that a more integrated and equitable data sharing is possible. And that's why I decided to invite these fantastic experts today. And each of them will bring a crucial perspective to these challenges. I will quickly just mention who are our panelists today, and I will introduce them in more details before the talks. So today we're going to have Dominic Roche, who is Senior Policy Advisor at the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada. He will be followed by Christine Ward-Page, who is the founder and creator of eOceans. Then we will have John Vicaire, who is the Executive Director of the GINU, and Paulina Salinas-Ruiz, who is the Data Integration Specialist at the Marine Science Program in the Pacific Salmon Foundation. So each panelist will speak for 5 to 7 minutes, and after that, you're welcome to ask your questions. You can either raise your hands, open your mic, and ask your questions, or you can also write your questions in the chat. And then we will try to balance the best way we can. Okay, with no more, I will begin with Dominic Roche, who is the Senior Policy Advisor at the Social Science and Humanities Research Council of Canada, where he leads the policy work on research data management and sharing. He also serves on the Open Science Working Group for the Canadian Science Publishing, the Data Rescue Committee for the NSER Create Living Data Project, and the Canada National Committee for the Co-Data. And very important to our panel, he has a PhD in aquatic ecology and a lot of experience with fish ecology research. So he understands many of the challenges faced by the Atlantic salmon community. Please, Dominic, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Renata. Can you hear me okay? I think
yes.
so. Great. Okay, yeah, well, thanks for that introduction. I'm really pleased, and thanks for the invitation to be part of this panel. Really pleased to be here. It might be a little bit bizarre that you have someone from SSHRC, so Social Sciences Humanities Research Council, talking to you about data management. But as Renata mentioned, my background is in ecology. I was an aquatic ecologist, and I did a lot of what's called meta research, so research on research practices as a postdoc over multiple years, and I became very interested in science policy. And a lot of my research at the time had to do with data sharing practices in ecology and evolution. And that led me down the path of policymaking to improve data sharing practices. I'm now based at SSHRC, but the reason I'm there is because SSHRC is in charge of implementing big parts of our tri-agency research data management policy, which I'll talk about briefly. But a lot of our work, and this policy in particular, as the name says, is tri-agency. So it applies just as well to people at CIHR, NSERC, and NSERC. And so my talk today isn't going to be specific to salmon. It's specific to data, but obviously it applies, as I said, to all disciplines. And so it concerns research on salmon and is relevant to researchers who are funded by the tri-agencies, but we're also hoping and seeing actually that our tri-agency policy is being used as a model for other funding agencies to implement their own RDM policy. So if you hear me talking about RDM throughout this presentation, I'll be referring to research data management. All right, so what I want to do today then is just to present you with, give you a little overview basically of what our policy is and how it affects you as researchers. So the tri-agency RDM policy has three main requirements. I assume you're not familiar with it, so I'll just quickly walk you through it. You don't have to worry about the text in gray here, but it's suffice to note that there's three components to our policy. The first one is that institutions who are eligible to administer funding from the tri-agencies had to develop an institutional RDM strategy, essentially to improve research data management within their walls. The second requirement is that researchers applying for certain funding opportunities have to submit data management plans alongside with their application. And finally, the third requirement is data deposit. So this requirement hasn't been implemented yet. My role at the agencies is to refine that requirement and then do the public engagements that are needed in that respect and then implement it. And essentially, what this requires is that researchers have to deposit data that are associated with research published in preprint and journal articles that are agency funded. One important aspect of our tri-agency policy is that the respect of Indigenous data sovereignty is really baked into each one of these requirements. As you can see here from the highlighted text, institutional strategies had to consider Indigenous data sovereignty. In the creation of data management plans, there's a requirement that DMPs be co-developed with Indigenous rights holders, collectives, organizations. And then finally, with regards to data deposits, essentially the communities and Indigenous participants in the research are the ones who determine how data are ultimately collected, used, preserved, and deposited and shared. So I'll just give you a little bit of an overview of those three requirements and where we're at right now, because this does impact you directly as researchers. Indirectly, if you're not funded by us at the tri-agencies, but still. So in terms of the RDM strategies, 256 institutions were subject to this requirement. And so far, we've gotten 237 strategies that are posted publicly. I'll share the link in a sec, but essentially this is a really high level of compliance. It's great for Canada, and whenever I present these numbers internationally, other funding agencies also ask us, like, wow, it's impressive that Canadian institutions are doing so well. How did you do this? So good for us. And then good for us as Canadians and institutions to be trailblazers here. I don't know of any actually country that requires institutions to have RDM strategies. If you're curious about what these strategies contain and you haven't had a look at your own institution strategy, you can access them at this link. They're all posted on science.gc.ca. And also, some colleagues and I did a mixed method study, essentially kind of a review of over 200 strategies that were submitted to pull out kind of the challenges and opportunities and get a sense of the landscape of different RDM practices across Canada. And that's all summarized in a paper that was published this year in the open access journal Facets. So you can also access that here via the DOI. I'll share my slides with Renata afterwards so that she can distribute them. With regards to data management plans, the tri-agencies have launched pilots for 22 funding opportunities, and we've had a look at all of these DMPs. They've provided us with very useful insight into data deposit and data sharing practices, which we're using in the implementation of the third requirement. And right now, we're pursuing alignment on the expectations when it comes to data management plans, approaches to peer review of these DMPs, and then common resources and support for researchers funded across our 3 agencies. And lastly, the third requirement, data deposits. I'll spend a little bit more time on this one because we're fleshing it out a little bit more. We've been doing engagements over the last 2 years with the research community, RDM experts across the country, research administrators at institutions, et cetera, and our findings have been compiled in what we call a what we heard report on these engagements on data deposits. I'm not going to walk you through what we found because I don't have time, but if you're interested, have a look at this. Essentially, 2 of the big kind of findings is that we have great infrastructure in Canada right now for depositing and sharing data that are non-sensitive, but we are lacking infrastructure for depositing and sharing data that are sensitive. And we have service providers like the Digital Research Alliance of Canada and Borealis, which is kind of a distributed institutional repository who are working on solutions to facilitate the deposit and sharing of sensitive data. And with regards to this final requirement, we're currently in the process of exploring ways in which we can provide greater clarity on 3 aspects of the requirement. I mentioned that it's not yet implemented. It was the least mature of the requirements at the time when the policy was launched in 2021. So right now we're working on providing greater clarifications on how researchers can retain their data, have to deposit their data, and make their data available. I see that I'm already almost at 7 minutes, so I'm actually not going to walk you through each one of them other than to quickly tell you that we're implementing this essentially in the spirit of the fact that retaining, depositing, and sharing research data is really fundamental to good research practice because they promote transparency, reproducibility, and reuse of the data. And all of this is really key for strengthening research integrity and research efficiency. So data reuse, something that is obviously very important to us at the agency. So essentially what this requirement means is that researchers will have to retain the data that results from agency-funded research. They can't just discard it for a determined period of time, likely 10 years, but we haven't settled on that yet. Then whenever it's possible and infrastructure exists, researchers will have to deposit data in repositories, and we'll provide some guidance on how to choose a repository. When infrastructure isn't available, then the fallback is on data retention. And then finally, there will be a requirement for researchers to make data available in line with the broadly accepted principles that data should be as open as possible, but as closed or as secured as necessary. Because we know that some data are sensitive. For example, salmon populations that are threatened, we might not want to disclose their location publicly. And so these data have to be protected, and they can be made available, but there needs to be secured, controlled access management to ensure they don't fall in the wrong hands. So I'll stop there. I had more to say, but I'll be happy to answer questions if you have any.
Oh, thank you very much, Dom. That's great. I'm very happy to see that you're having so many positive results. And yeah, it would be nice to discuss this later. So yeah, now we're going to move to Christine Ward-Page. Christine has a PhD in marine science, spent 2 decades working for the industry, academia, and government, including the Fisheries and Oceans Canada. She produced top-cited research that shaped international policy. And currently, she is the founder, CEO, and the lead scientist at eOceans, a platform for automated data management, spatial temporal analysis, collaboration, and reporting. Please, Christine, I will just make you the presenter in a second.
That was a great introduction, both of you. Thanks. We could have a whole talk, I think, from Dominic all on its own.
Sorry, I meant to stop sharing my screen there, and I think I just exited. I pressed the X and was kicked out.
Great.
Okay, we can see your slides. Thank you so much, Christine.
Okay, great. Thank you. So as Renata said, I'm Christine Ward-Page. I'm the founder of eOceans, and for 20 years I studied fish populations, threats, values, and more. And over the years, I found that increasingly I had worked around the world, and all the data sets, all the analyses, all the reports that I had written were all manual, siloed, and slow. And so this was creating misinformation, opportunities for conflict and mistrust. And so I set out to create a new way of doing research that, so this is an example of just one example from Atlantic Salmon. So one project, it's a report on a very small area by one organization covering a small data, longitudinal data set, and published in 2021. And yeah, so, but imagine if we could all be doing our research on our own questions all around the world. So whether you're studying salmon or tuna or any invasive species, commercial fisheries, whatever it is, that we are working on our own with our own questions all across the country and around the world. And all that data was feeding into a global data set. So you are understanding your project as you're collecting data. So you're in the field, you're collecting your data. At the end of the day, your data comes in and you can see a portal or a console with all the data you collected up to today. And that then you can also download that data in a standardized interoperable format so that every one of our projects come out in the same format. And then not only that, to be sharing, one-to-one, but if that data can then also slide over into all the different projects that you're partnering with. So if you're out there collecting data on salmon and you catch an invasive species, that data can then feed into an invasive species project that you're working on. So that was the vision, that you can automatically and seamlessly be collaborating with your partners in a fair and ethical way. And so if we think about it this way, is the old way of doing data science is that you collect data, you manage the data. Every data set I worked on was always different. So even the date variable would come in different formats, and it made it very challenging to make them interoperable. And just that one simple variable. And then you've got to go through extensive quality control, especially when you're bringing data sets together, summary analysis, you're exploring your analysis, you're generating maps, graphs, and reports, and then you're sending them out for publication and then communicating, increasingly communicating through social media, which has become sort of a questionable place to share information. And so the vision was to collect data and to go through those steps to really free up a lot of our time. And especially where many of our teams are really spread too thin. That was the goal. So that is what eOceans is, so that you can have a paper like this today, but it will be up to date with data up to and including today, and breaking down silos with projects across the distribution of salmon, but also around the world, and keeping everything up to date and working anywhere. So that is the goal of eOceans as a platform, is transforming data into timely, credible, scalable intelligence to support effective management and decisions. So everyone in this room, we know, is working on very important projects, and it is highly dynamic and complex, and the environments are fast changing. And we're all asking very similar questions, slightly different from different perspectives, different angles, different species, different locations. And so we're asking, but these tend to be, I did a meta-analysis of fish-based research questions around the world, and these tend to be the most common questions that we're asking over and over again. And so the idea here is that we can get faster reporting, we can get our, saving the amount of time that we have to spend cleaning and analyzing data, and the amount of time we spend in manual processes like GIS. And we have so far over 1 billion variable combinations, so that you can be stitching together pollution with temperature, with fish abundance or presence, absence, whatever it is, all in one space. And I do not have time probably to get into how it works here. So next steps, if you wanted to meet with me, we can talk about how to add eOceans to your toolbox. tell partners. And we are an expert team built in Canada. So we're software built in Canada. And I put it back there to just show that it's not just salmon, but things can be much more interactive because that's the way our ecosystems work. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Christine. I think that's a fantastic tool, and that's why I really wanted to bring it up here. I think that that's a tool that can be very useful for salmon conservation. Okay, moving on now. We are moving to John Mervyn Vicaire, who is the Executive Director of the Gaspé Institute of Natural Understanding, which is a nonprofit organization focused on aquatic research who works collaboratively with First Nation governments, organizations, and public and private stakeholders to provide applied scientific knowledge concerning aquatic resources. John, I will make you the presenter. Okay, you should be able to share your slides now.
Oh, it's okay. Sorry.
Not yet.
Screen. Okay, hang on.
Yes, coming up. Yeah.
Can you see the presentation?
We can see the presentation. It's not in presenters mode yet.
Okay, okay. So I'll start.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much, John.
Okay. Walali of Kandel with me of Kiskuk, the Louis John Mervyn Vicaire, Applistigus Lewi, Applistigus Wiki. Thank you for the invitation. My name is John Mervyn Vicaire, Executive Director of GINU, Gaspé Institute of Natural Understanding. So good afternoon. I think a lot of researchers are trained that data is an abstraction. Data is points on a graph, p-values, trends. But I want to make an important note that when you're working with Indigenous communities, data is not just an abstract resource. Really, it's a digital extension of the people, their land, and their culture. So today, I'm going to talk a little bit about data sovereignty. But really, it's a shift. It's a movement from extracting, such as on the left, which is the default. I think a lot of people, that's their default. We go into an area, we extract data, and then we leave. We parachute in, and then we leave. But really, it's if you want to up the quality of your research, it's important to move to see Indigenous communities not just as subjects or data points, but really as partners in governing the data itself. So what is Indigenous data sovereignty? Simply put, it's the right of Indigenous nations to control, to own, to access, and to possess their data that's derived from them. So, it directly challenges what they teach you in academia. So I think the assumption is that when you collect data, you own it. But really, Indigenous data sovereignty argues that the data in which you've collected the data that's collected is also subject to the laws of the land and the customs of the nations where it originates. So why would you think Indigenous data sovereignty is necessary? So I just want to bring up a quick example. In 1989, there was a tribe down in the US where they provided blood samples for diabetes research. But unbeknownst to them, the researcher used those blood samples for other types of research as well, which ultimately, the results of that research ended up stigmatizing that nation. So it was a long, drawn-out legal battle to get those samples back. And so, in a sense, data sovereignty is very important for Indigenous nations because of what I just mentioned, and it also goes beyond just having broad consent forms. So, how do you do that? I'm sure everybody is well aware of the FAIR principles, And I think many of you are under pressure to follow the FAIR principles. So, you know, you're making data findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable. And I think you're pushed towards open science by funders, journals, academic institutions. But as a presenter mentioned earlier, sometimes open data can actually be harmful to in an indigenous context. Also, when it comes to culturally sensitive knowledge, location data, or working with endangered species. So we must layer CARE principles. So I don't know if too many people are familiar with CARE principles. So CARE principles are something that's being worked on and has been worked on for quite a number of years throughout the world by the Global Indigenous Data Alliance and others. But it's supposed to work hand in hand with FAIR principles. So CARE, which is C for collective benefit for the community good. It also, you know, the data should help the community, not just your careers. A, authority to control. So community should be deciding who can have access to sensitive data. R is responsibility, is being accountable to the communities about how the data is used. And ethics, prioritizing Indigenous communities' rights over somebody's right to know. So, if, you know, we have, think of FAIR as your, it's like a technical standard, and CARE could be your ethical standard. In Canada, which, you know, we have the OCAP principles to help put it into practice. So the OCAP principles are developed by the First Nations Information Governance Center. And really, we have the OCAP principles built into all of our data sharing agreements, and you know, it's at the heart of our data management. So how do you implement OCAP? It really starts as early as possible. Before you write your grant and you're seeking ethics approval from your internal boards. Think of the community as well. Some of them have their own you know, data management boards. So think about data sharing agreements with the community as well. During collection of your data, acknowledge that they have the right to opt out at any time, because ultimately it's important to understand that it's important to shift from the idea of owning data to being stewards of data. Just like us, we collect a lot of data, scientific data, but also cultural data, and we see ourselves as stewards of that data, not necessarily the owners of that data. Also, when using metadata, there's also labels that we can use. There's also traditional knowledge labels that you can add in your metadata that kind of basically reflects the wishes of the communities in which the data is derived from. In conclusion, you know, the first image I've shown, it was meant to be a contrast between extraction and community partnerships. Here at GINU, through wide seeing approach developed by Dr. Albert Marshall and Dr. Medina Marshall, we try to approach issues from multiple perspectives. So we have the Western knowledge perspective, you know, conducting the applied science, but we also have the Indigenous perspective as well in the traditional knowledge that we use, and I think our work is much better as a result. So again, thank you. I just want you to, I guess, final thought, don't think of Indigenous data sovereignty as a barrier to your research. It should be seen as a pathway to better research, because when communities trust you, they're more willing to engage in the work. So thank you very much.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you so much, John. Yeah, this last sentence, yeah, summarizes everything. That's I fully agree with that. Thank you so much. Okay, and now moving on to our last panelist today. It's Paulina. So Paulina is the data integration specialist at the Marine Science program of the Pacific Salmon Foundation. She is a marine biologist with extensive experience conducting field work and data analysis. She works with the Marine Science program team to create products that allow for easy understanding of the distribution and trends of various physical, chemical, and biological aspects of British Columbia coast. Thank you so much. Paulina, the floor is yours. I will make you presenter.
Thank you, Renata. Okay, let's see.
Okay, should be able to share now.
Can everybody see that?
Yes, that works perfectly. Thank you very much.
Great. Well, thank you for having me and for that lovely introduction. My name is Paulina, as Renata said, and I work at the PSF Marine Data Center. So I thought that I would talk a little bit about what the data management aspect of the data center looks like for us. Just give a little bit of an overview of the data center, and then talk about what lessons we've learned as in our careers as data stewards. So, let's see. I think I went too far. So first, I thought I would go over a little bit of the data pipeline of the data center. So the data center has one of our main products is called the data portal. And this data portal, which is what I'll be focusing the most on today, it was conceived as a one-stop shop for Pacific salmon related data sets in the Salish Sea. And this was as a result of a project called the Salish Sea Marine Survival Project. Now, when this data portal was created, and it's part of what I'll go through later, this was about 10 years ago, and the technological need was much different from what it is today. And so really what our goal was to just see what data was out there, bring it into the data portal as form of metadata records, and just make it as widely available to the public as possible. So as part of data sources, we have data collected by PSF, data from our partners, such as the Forest Fish Network. We have isolated data sources from other nonprofits or the government, and we also have a remote data archive that just brings a ton of geospatial data together. Then once we've gathered all that data, or normally what we do is we either harvest metadata from DFO, since they're one of our partners, and make it widely accessible through our portal, or we just create metadata records in a software called GeoNetwork. That's it's an open source software, and so we do try to make our data available and open for everybody, with some exceptions, of course. And then there's other software that we use for data processing. So we use, spatial analysis, such as FME, ArcGIS, which I would assume that most of you are familiar with, things like QGIS, and other coding software such as RStudio and Python. Now, once we've processed the data, we have partnered with UBC, and so we have some space in their server that hosts our GeoNetwork and GeoServer software. So that's where we normally, that's what we use to host our data portal. And so thankfully we have ample space, and we also have space in ArcGIS and in a cloud server. So we use cloud servers quite often. And we also use GitHub to document all our processes for software, for data products, etc. Now, since we're using all these different softwares and bringing all the data together in the form of dashboards, interactive maps, metadata records, web pages, what we do for the public is we actually bring it all together in our website. So our websites are front end, and we provide access, as I said, to the raw data, to the maps. We have different atlases. We have knowledge hubs that focus on specific topics and sometimes highlight other programs within PSF, such as our bottlenecks project or citizen science oceanography project. Now, we also work with other entities to try to bring our data to a wider variety of audiences. For example, that citizen science oceanography program, that program ran for about 10 years. It was a monitoring program, and they use citizen science to collect data on temperature, zoology, nutrients, harmful algae. And we have worked with, for example, OBIS, which is the Ocean Biodiversity Information System, also with different platforms such as OBIS, CEUS, which is a Canadian Integrated Ocean Observing System, and GBIF, so the Global Biodiversity Information Facility, to kind of bring our data sets to a higher standard, such as Darwin Core, so that they can be standardized with a wider variety of data sets across the globe, I guess, and then they can serve a purpose to a wider variety of audiences, which has been talked about today already. But I want to focus the last couple of minutes of this presentation on the actual lessons learned. So now that you have a little bit of an overview of what the data center is and how it works, I do want to highlight a few things that we've learned through this process. So one is standardization. It goes a long way. As I've said, it goes a long way in our data quality. It goes a long way with documentation, and it goes a long way with quality controls too, and just making sure that our data and metadata standards are comparable to other metadata standards, just to make sure that our quality and the image of PSF are high and reputable as well. Another thing that we've learned is that there's always a need for an interdisciplinary team. So normally, I feel that especially in the biology, salmon, Atlantic or Pacific world, there's a lot of really expert biologists that are part of teams, and they don't often have the computer science or like data expertise needed to create certain products or to handle or manage the data in a certain way to be able to standardize it or to have it put in relational databases or things like that. So just thinking about like what is the right combination of people that would be appropriate, that would help us create, oh, and I'm almost out of time, create our work and bring it to a wider variety of audiences and make sure that it's quality work. So training biologists in data science, but also having some experts in data science would also be important. And the last thing that I really want to talk about, I mean, also technologies that are always changing. So making sure that you stay, on as refreshed and on top of it with the technology changes, especially now with all the machine learning and AI that's coming up. But also data stewardship challenges that came up in a previous presentation today already. So just knowing like what are the data sets that already exist, like, because they're often, fragmented or not consistent. And so how can we use the FAIR principles to like manage that data, fill in the gaps if we can, and otherwise make it, as was already said today, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And how do we make sure when we're working with First Nations and Indigenous partners that we respect that data sovereignty, like the CARE principles, and that we actually work with nations to best represent their data, to do it with respect, and to respect the privacy needs for the data via data sharing agreements. And that's all I have today. Sorry, I went a little bit over, but I hope that was helpful, and I'm happy to answer questions later.
Thank you very much, Paulina. No, that was great. That was very helpful. Yeah, the lessons learned, it's always, it's very useful, and it's particularly useful for me right now doing a very similar job to you. Okay, so yeah, thank you so much. That was all great. I think this brings very different perspectives and I would say very optimistic perspectives of like of how we could improve data management for conservation in general, not only for Atlantic salmon. And I see different pathways, I see different challenges. Yeah, so for the audience, we would like to open the floor to you now, because we are a bit behind in our schedule. So if you want, you can just use the little hand on the bottom left side of your screen to raise your hand, and I will ask you to open your mic and ask your question, or you can just write your question in the chat, and that will also work, and we can read the question for you. And while we wait for some questions, I can start. I have lots of questions, but I would like to start. Oh, okay, no, we have a question already. Great, fantastic. So Tommy, you can just open your mic, and if you like, and ask your question, please. Are you able? If you're not, I can try to unmute you. No? Can you please write in the chat if you're not able to ask your question? Okay. I have been muted by the organizer. That would be me. Kristen, are you there? Can you help me out with that?
Hi, Renata. Yeah, I enabled his mic, so we'll see if we can get him his sound.
Thank you. If not, Tommy, I'm sorry for that. If you're not able to speak, can you just please write your question, maybe? Yeah, please, if you don't mind. No? Okay, he will type it out. It will take a few minutes. Okay, thank you so much. Sorry for that. So I guess I will ask my question while we're waiting. So this question is mostly directly to Paulina, but I think any of you could answer that. I think one of the challenges we have with salmon data is that salmon conservation actually spans like freshwater, estuary, marine ecosystems, like very different ecosystems and very different life stages. And designing a data management system that can at the same time respect like these different types of data, local autonomy, but still allowing for regional, national, or simple synthesis, how can we avoid to erasing context or meaning during data integration, but at the same time make the data useful for making decision making? In your experience, Paulina, and I guess all the other panelists, like what do you think works the best and what doesn't work? What are the main challenges?
I think in my experience at Pacific Salmon Foundation, so far we have different departments. So we have a department that focuses on watersheds and a department that focuses on marine and estuarine systems. And so the department that focuses on watersheds, they have really high-end products such as the Pacific Salmon Explorer and the Status Salmon. But what we're trying to do, I feel that originally that structure made sense because, you know, we had the freshwater focus, and so those data sets were handled a little bit differently and shared differently. And then on the other side, we had the marine, which was not as widely studied. And so it was, I would say, a little bit behind in the sense that like we were doing pit tags, and so now we've been waiting for those pit tag results to come in. or we're starting or we recently started this estuarine research project that will wrap up in a year from now. But what we're actually moving towards is just having one big kind of pool of salmon data that we integrate better. So maybe now we integrate the marine part of it into the watersheds products, potentially. I don't know if we're actually doing that, but that would be really cool. So then they can actually, those products could actually span the entire life cycle of the Pacific salmon, and we can't have them just be separate things, because at the end of the day, it's not a separate thing, right? It's just one cycle. They end up coming back, rearing, and so it's important to keep it, in my opinion, as integrated as possible. And I do mean it when I say integrated, indigenous knowledge as well, and traditional knowledge, and would be pretty cool, I think, beneficial. So it's all, I don't have a clear answer. Because
that was very, that's clear. I feel like there's no perfect answers. I'm going through the same challenge right now. It's very difficult, to integrate, and that's where we're looking here, like a few solutions or a few ideas that might help. And I guess, Dominic, also, do you have something to add to this topic? Yes, please, before we move on.
Yeah, sure. I think, Paulina mentioned earlier on the term interoperability. And I think from a technical standpoint, it's really important, for the integration of data sets from different platforms. I think we're past the stage now, in Canada and the world, where we can have one, say, repository or platform where we can make sure all the data goes to it. There's just so many out there right now that the GINU is out of the box. And so what's really important is that these, repositories, platforms, whatever you want to call them, make sure that they use standard or metadata standards, and that also they and the researchers uploading data use shared ontologies, vocabularies, so that the data can be easily combined. Anyone you speak to who's tried to combine data sets from different sources will tell you that that is the most challenging part. And sometimes it's just easier to go and recollect the data yourself. So I would say those are really critical elements. And then I also wanted to just quickly do a bit of shameless promotion for a grant that we offer at SSHRC to help communities of practice essentially develop standards or shared vocabularies or anything that can help with research data management capacity building. They're called RDM Capacity Building Initiative Grants, and they're open to anyone. It's SSHRC that has them. We tend to favor projects that have a social science slant to them, and I'm sure there's a lot of that in salmon research. But if anyone's interested in developing, or working on products, or it could be workshops or events that help essentially the community come up with better systems, better standards, better ways of operating, that money's available. I think it's up to $50,000. And then if there's time, I actually would be very interested in hearing John's thoughts on perhaps how we can more efficiently braid indigenous and traditional knowledge with Western science, which is kind of part of your question, I think, Renata.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, John would like to pitch in.
Yeah, very good question. How to braid? I mean, there's a lot of different terms, I guess, braiding and weaving. And to be honest, that's also a question that we struggle with as an indigenous organization, right? A lot of times we look to systematic frameworks and processes and procedures, but working with indigenous data, and not just indigenous data, but indigenous knowledge, which is much more than just data, right? So it includes the person's experiences and the context of their reality and their experience. So I guess what we try to do, when we approach certain issues, it really is just sort of we try not to follow a systematic process, but we speak to a lot of people. We're an organization that we have, we have engineers, we have biologists, we have, geomatic experts, but we also have elders that we also work with closely, and so we get a lot of guidance from them. And really, often it's just, that systematic, that magic framework. I haven't found it yet, but really, I think it's more of the allowing that knowledge to kind of cohabitate in your minds and in your discussions, and that's how we sort of try to find the best solutions to environmental issues.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And do you see, like, I think I have a quick follow-up. Do you see that we're getting there? Do you think we're getting there? Do you think this ideas that you have and that for Indigenous data sovereignty, do you think they are being more contemplated? Like, I think Dom gave a few examples or how they are trying to contemplate this in the policies. How far would you say we are? Do you think the conversation is bringing to like good results, or do you think we're still too far?
Well, I think how far we are as a collective, I think, is a different question. Indigenous data sovereignty is a goal and aspiration of just about every other Indigenous community and organization that I know. But I think we still have far to go because we do run into a lot of barriers, especially when it comes to government and universities in terms of respecting Indigenous data sovereignty. So while Indigenous communities and organizations are making strides, us as a collective, we still have a lot of work to do.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. So now I see that Tommy has posted his question in the chat. Thank you so much, Tommy, and I'm sorry that it didn't work. So I'm going to read your question. I'm interested in opinions regarding the government collected data. For example, the DFO is one entity that annually collects a lot of data across the Atlantic seaboard. The data is paid for by taxpayers, yet accessing the raw data is not generally possible. Who is responsible fixing this and how? I think that's a fantastic question. And I don't know, I guess, well, I can share a bit of my experience if any of the panelists have more info into that. I can share my experience. I have been collecting a lot of, gathering together a lot of data, including some data from DFO. And my experience is the data is not readily available. It's true. It's not very easy to find sometimes, but they have been very open in sharing the data once you email them. And I think that's brings to the question, maybe the data is available, but it's not easy or really truly accessible. And there are still a lot of barriers for people to access them. And I think the question would be like, how can we make these data more findable and more accessible in general? Dom, do you have a follow-up on that?
Yeah, I think unfortunately that's the reality, that in principle, based on open government, which is essentially a sense that's been adopted by government, what we call SBDA, so science-based departments and agencies, there should be what's called proactive disclosure. So information should be made proactively available to the public. And there's a portal for that. I think it's called Open Government. But in talking to researchers and others working at these SDDAs, it takes a lot of time, and there's a lot of standards that need to be met for data to be released on these platforms. And so I think the government's just not keeping pace with it. Again, I work in a different agencies, if we want. We are funders of research that is conducted by researchers outside of government. Research that's done internally in government is governed by different policies. But as Renata mentioned, it is, and it should be possible to get access to these data. So requests can be lodged, ideally, directly by email, but worst case scenario through an access to information request. And the issue is, I guess, knowing what data exists out there. And because metadata aren't always readily available, it might entail having to write to DFO or contact there, wherever you can identify, to ask about what data actually exists before you can even request access to these data.
Yeah, another thing I can say is that they are working on a portal where they will have better metadata. So part of the job of my job as a data mobilization leader is to really try to provide this kind of metadata, facilitate finding access to data. And a lot of the government organizations, they are actually in this process of making their data more findable by creating a metadata portal that we hope to integrate with our own data portal at the JV. So hopefully that's, as Dom suggested, that will make access to data, well, at least finding which data is there, if not better access to raw data, at least it will be easier to find where the data is and what kind of data is there. Okay, we have a few more raised hands, so I will move on. Oh, that was Graham. Oh, there he is. Oh, Christine, sorry. Would you like to add to this topic? I see your hand now. Yes, please, go ahead. You're muted. Your mic is on.
There's not a lot of time left, so maybe I'll let it go for the other question instead of adding to it.
We can go back to this. Yeah, if it's.
Well, I just wanted to add one point. The way that we look at it is that there's data, and that produces graphs, maps, tables, you know, and then we have a co-interpretation channel where the stories and the interpretations can come together so that you have the more two-eyed seeing approach. And so that is like built into the whole system, because, you know, I don't want to own people's data and I don't want to own people's stories either. So having that sort of a closed space where people can share and interpret data, I envision, you know, elders and people being able to understand and help provide context on what, you know, the recent trends are that are happening today, but intergenerational knowledge is much bigger than that. And so these little trends that we see today with the data sets we have are really sort of minuscule compared to that intergenerational knowledge. So being able to bring that together, I think, is really important. And so I'll stop there.
Yeah, I completely agree. That's a very good point, and I think that's another challenge, right? I think that's talks about what I asked before about how not missing the particularities of the data too when we standardize it in a different way. There's no one perfect way, so we were going to have to do different ways depending on what is the goal. Okay, Graham, are you able to?
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yay! Yes, we can. Okay.
Hi everybody, thanks very much for those presentations. I did join a bit late, so I'm not sure if I missed one. Apologies if I did. I work at the Atlantic Salmon Trust in the UK. I'm a data steward with them. And my question has kind of morphed over the discussion, so it's a much more narrow one now, but it's on interoperability. We've kind of, you guys have all touched on that. And it's kind of at Christine, I suppose, on the eOceans, is your metadata interoperable, and is there plans to kind of have an openly searchable metadata catalog coming from eOceans?
Yeah, that's a great question. So interoperability is like key to the platform and designing it across species, across locations. And so we follow Darwin Core, and then for all the aquatic species, we have worms built in. And so it's updates daily, thousands of species. As the names change, the inputs change, but so do the outputs. So everything stays up to date. And then with eOceans, you own your data, so you put it in and you decide who you're sharing it with. And then they have, you know, different ways of either downloading the data. So if you decide to share it with DFO and DFO can download the data, or they can't, you are deciding. So every person that's providing data has that stewardship. So if you want to share it with John and John's community can download it, that's your decision to share it with John, or vice versa. So everyone has that stewardship capacity built into the system. Happy to discuss after.
Awesome, thank you.
Okay, so I don't think we have any more questions. I also think we don't have more time. But yeah, this is this is amazing. Thank you so much. I think like what we see is that we have still lots of challenges, but we also have upcoming policies and funding. I think that's very exciting that we have some funding opportunities to discuss how we can make data more interoperable. And I think that's very important because often we don't have time to work on that, right? We are always under like a lot of pressure to like show the results, show and we just don't have time to discuss these important questions. So I think finding space like this discussion today to share what works for one group or what works for another, or what kind of new tools and technologies we can use for what different purposes. I think we need more of that because we often don't have time to bring these discussions and then end up with everyone, each organization and each institution doing in a different way, and then regretting that they didn't have this conversation before. I truly thank all the panelists and for being here today. If the audience has other questions, you can write to us, and we will be happy to redirect them to the speakers. I also thank the FCAS for co-hosting this event with us. I think it was a great opportunity, and for letting us use their platform. And there will be more collaborations like that. The FCAS webinars will be showing a lot of the work done by the students at the JV Hub. So stay tuned for the next sessions, and thank you very much for the participation, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks.